Our response to God's greatness and His mercy should always be to worship Him because He is God. And no matter what we do, no matter what we accomplish, or how great we may be here on earth, there's nothing that we can do that comes anywhere close to being as great as God and what God does and who He is. And as children of God, as Christians, as saints of God, we always want to keep that perspective that God is worthy of worship and glory and honor, and that everything that we do is to the glory of God. We are officially in the holiday season, and I know that there are sanctuary Sunday school members, family members out there who are in lack and don't have what you need, not just for the holiday, but in general. So, in this season of giving, I'd like us to give. I will not be putting names out there and putting people on camera while I give to them. What I would like to do is collect donations and give to families who are in need. So if you do have a need, go to the website www.thesanctuary.academy, and there will be a place there for you to tell me what you need or what's going on with you. And also, Giving Tuesday is coming up on December 3rd. It's Giving Tuesday. That's when I'm launching a campaign where we can give so that we can help as many people as possible. I know that there's tons of places where you can give, and there's all of these charitable organizations, but I still think that we have responsibility to help those in our circle and help those that we come in contact with. I say all the time, my mom used to tell me that if you come in contact with somebody in need and you can help them, you absolutely have to do that. That's what I plan to do, and I know that I have my Sanctuary Academy family out there who will help me as well. So look for the campaign on Giving Tuesday. That is Tuesday, December 3rd. Also, you can make a donation at any time to the Sanctuary Academy. Just put a note that it is for holiday giving, and I will make sure that we help families in need. And thank you so much. Welcome back to the Sanctuary Sunday School. If this is your first time, great big warm welcome to you. Let me know you're here in the comments. Go ahead and subscribe. Tap that bell if you're one of the regulars who's always here. Thank you so much for sticking with us, and I want you to share the channel. I am still on a mission to reach 1 million souls for Christ, and I know that you're going to help me do that. So I am so excited about being here, and this week's subject is David's worship. And as we know, David is one of the greatest kings of all times, and he's a man after God's own heart. And so he's actually one of my favorite Bible characters. I would say that David and Paul are my favorites. So we're talking about King David here, and we're talking about the return, about him bringing the Ark of the Covenant to the city of David, the Ark of the Lord. Now, when you speak of the Ark, this was the most valuable and sacred thing in Israel. It contained the stone tablets where God carved out the Ten Commandments for Moses himself. It also contained a jar of manna, and it contained Aaron's rod. And the significance of Aaron's rod is that it budded. And when it budded, it had already been cut off. So typically when you cut a branch off of a tree, no more leaves are going to grow, right? Because the branch has been cut off and there's no way that it can grow. But Aaron's rod had been cut off, and God still allowed it to bud. It still bloomed, and that was there. So that is what the contents that were in this ark. And these were all very powerful signs and wonders that of God being with them, and that they were God's chosen people. And the ark represented having the presence of God with them. And the presence of God is something that is so significant. And right there, I looked at that because when we have our services in church, and we prepare and we do all these things. We make sure there's enough seating. We make sure the temperature is just right. We print programs to make sure everybody has a program. You know, the choir has their robes. The preacher has his robe. And we make all of these preparations. But we see here in this lesson today that David was making preparation for the ark of God, the presence of God. And I like this passage because he was so passionate about it and he was working diligently to make sure that everything was just right. And when I thought about that, when we go to church sometimes, we want to make sure that we set the atmosphere and make sure that the presence of the Lord is welcomed in our services. We don't want to get so caught up in making sure that we've got everything else just right and we don't leave room for God. So David meticulously planned this and made sure that there was a proper place to house the ark of God. And then also I looked at the way that David handled the ark of God, where only the priests could touch it. And when you look at the way that Israel was organized, the Levites were the priestly tribes. And even when it came down to dividing up the land, the Levite tribe did not get a land because they were the governing body and they were the priests. And so they worked there and they worked with all of the tribes and they took care of God's business and God's house and the temple. And so David said, these are the only people who are supposed to handle this ark. And I like that he had that order. And you know, sometimes in church, it's very important that we maintain decency and order because God is orderly. And when he gave these prophets and these kings these instructions, it was so important that they followed them. And the handling of this ark of God was critical. And David understood that. And even for those of you out there who are leaders, even for me, with the way that I conduct the sanctuary, Sunday school, and even at my own church, I am always so cautious about what I present to God's people, how I carry myself, how I treat God's people, because that is delicate. If you're a leader, your job is to lead people to the Lord, lead them in worship, lead them in fasting and prayer and repentance. That's our goal. It's never about you. And I love that because David, being one of the most powerful kings in the world, one of the greatest warriors that ever lived, he understood that this ark, this vessel that represented the very presence of God was way bigger and way more significant than him. And so he had them come in. And then when the ark came in, it says that David was so happy until he danced. And it talks about his robe and what he had on and how the fine linen was there. You know, sometimes when you're wearing fine linen, you kind of want to be a little still because you want to stay crisp. David didn't care about that fine linen robe. He danced in the presence of the Lord. And he understood that the glory of God was greater than him as king. And it talked about his wife that was there, Michal, who was also the daughter of Saul, how she watched him as he danced and, you know, sort of with embarrassment. And she was not pleased with the way that David danced. And also, too, with the dance, he also brought in music. And I'm glad that that is a part of this passage because I've sang in a choir for years. And, you know, there's an old saying that says that the devil starts in the choir, which I don't truly believe that. But we have to understand even those gifts, the gifts to play music, the gift to sing, those gifts are to be used in the service to the glory of God and to invoke the presence of God and usher in worship. And that's why now they've kind of modified the term. You know, we call them something different. It used to be choir director, then it was minister music, now it's worship leader. Whatever you want to call yourself, it is always important to understand that role. I've had to function the role as director and minister of music, and my only job was to set the tone so that when the pastor came up, the atmosphere was set to receive the word of the Lord. It was never about people saying how good I sound or how good I can direct. It was never about any of that. And so it shows how everybody here, I love the humility that David excuse me, displays here so that we can understand just how great God is. David's worship, he worshiped the Lord with everything that he had. And I want to backtrack here and go back and again point out the preparation because sometimes that's where we're lacking. If your service starts at 10 a.m. and you get to church at 10:30 and you're a praise leader, you don't know if the door is open, you don't know if the church is clean, you don't know if everybody has their robe, you just kind of walk in. That's not what David did. David saw to everything being right. And even if you're not the pastor, even if you're not a deacon and you're a worship leader or you're a choir member or you're just coming to worship, you ought to at least get up, make the effort, prepare your heart, prepare your mind, prepare yourself for worship. Get to church on time and make sure that the atmosphere is set. Sit down and close out the world and meditate so that you're really prepared and qualified to usher God's people into worship. And even if you're not on the stage doing anything up in front of the people, just when you're in your seat to really go in and worship the Lord, just shut the entire world out. When David was dancing and he danced out that robe, he didn't care who saw him. He didn't care what was going on. That little linen robe he had on didn't mean anything. All he was so happy to be in the presence of the ark of the Lord. It is so blessed. It's such a blessing to be in the presence of the Lord. In the presence of the Lord, there is fullness of joy. And we see David displayed that joy. And that is the experience that we should have every time we are amongst God's people. If we don't feel that worship, and we don't feel that glory and that joy, there's something that we're not doing right. So we want to follow David's example of worship.